and I'd like to turn this over to Troy.
Thank you, John. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce tonight's presenter, Scott Sweet. He's a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed clinical addictions counselor. He's a certified teacher of mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR. Scott is a certified imago therapist and has broad experience in individual, family, and group work, including adolescents and those experiencing mental health and addiction challenges, frequently co-occurring. Scott grew up in Carmel, Indiana, and attended Indiana University and studied in history and criminal justice. He obtained a master's in life by traveling for a year after university. Eventually ending up in Washington, D.C., he worked in D.C. for 5 years for C-SPAN and REI and met his wife, Ann, there. They moved to Seattle, Washington for 5 years, and Scott worked for REI, enjoying the outdoor activities and industry. Their first child being born prompted a move back to Indiana, where Scott worked for the YMCA. He started a master's in social work upon completing some career counseling that indicated this would be a good fit. Thereafter, he worked for Gallahue Mental Health, Ivy Tech, and Centerpoint Counseling between 2005 and 2020. Scott started Insight Counseling Center in 2021 and enjoys working with clients from his home-based office. Scott and Ann now live in Fishers, Indiana. Their 2 daughters live in Nashville, Tennessee, and Florence, Italy. His presentation will include teaching, practice, breakouts, and discussion. Scott is willing to entertain questions throughout tonight's presentation. He will also be sharing information on MBSR class that he will be co-facilitating early next year. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Troy. Big shout out to Troy. He's a partner in my wellness, allowing me to be more present to myself, maybe bring presence to others. I see Troy nearly every morning at his CrossFit Fishers facility. So thank you, Troy. And it's good to be with you all. Yeah, a bit of a long introduction, but a little bit of my story. I think one significant part of that story was just some time in Asia where I learned about mindfulness. I guess it was 1990. And for an Indiana boy, this was a whole new field of knowledge for me. Someone said, hey, you got to try out this retreat. I went, and it ended up being a 10-day silent retreat. So I took a jump on the deep end quickly. And the teachings and the practice really resonated with me. So I've been practicing ever since. I've given this lecture one time before. It was for a group of folks that just were mentors for other mentees. And the idea of just the word presence seemed to be maybe supportive for them and for both parties. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about maybe what presence is and how we can incorporate it in our lives and be supportive of others. Let me share the screen. We do have a little, it's a little bit of a PowerPoint that I put together. So we're going to go through some slides. We'll have some breakout rooms. I do encourage, putting a hand up or literally or on the Zoom button. And if I don't see it, interrupt me. It would be nice to have some interactions on that. It is being recorded. My understanding is it can be kind of edited out if something personal comes up, if we need to at a later date. All right, without further ado, let me bring up this PowerPoint. All right. So, yeah, we're going to cover what is presence, how does presence perhaps benefit our relationships and ourselves. We'll do a little practice being present, kind of look at some common human patterns, maybe some suggestions for how to create presence in our own life, and suggestions for maybe being with others. I will say that that at times I'll be pretty binary and kind of explaining things. It's more about the pattern. I recognize that there's a scale to all things, but to kind of help paint the picture, some of the slides will be a bit simplistic, but it is talking about maybe a greater pattern. So I don't know if we can just, John said we can just do some breakout rooms and maybe just, go to that room and discuss perhaps for just a couple minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, what does presence mean to you? What does presence mean to you? All right, welcome back. Yeah, just checking in. What kind of came up for some folks, or if some folks would be willing to kind of share what presence means to them?
Well, we discussed not just being present like in nature or just, taking everything in. It's just being a little bit more present at all times, kind of, just understanding, just being there and taking not just nature in, but just the little days and the little things, just being a little bit more present with individuals and eye contact and things like that.
Yeah, just taking things in, seeing it all.
We talked that presence can have many, many, many meanings and forms. And we talked about a few. We talked about the presence of being aware right here, right now, with the professions that both my partner and I shared was, emotional regulation and how to be present to be able to do that. We also talked about being present, recognizing presence of the spirit or of God or of a deity when 2 or 3 are gathered, to be aware of that presence as well. So we talked about 3 different types of presence.
Yeah. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you also to Troy. Yeah, picking up that lots of options here. You guys kind of focused on maybe emotional regulation, maybe a higher power of sorts. And yeah, being right here, right now, taking it in. Maybe one more, or
there's else? A couple in the chat.
Okay.
So if you click the chat, or I can read them, it's up to you, Scott.
Yeah, go for it, Troy.
So Robert stated, physically showing up is one piece, choosing to join and be with others. Yeah. And then John wrote, willing to be on the edge sometimes, not always comfortable, but alive.
Well, those are beautiful. Those are beautiful. And I did not capture all these, but just threw out a couple here.
And there's one more from Richard. He said, I sometimes frame presence is the courage to show up and the courage to stay.
Courage to show up and courage to stay. All right. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. So maybe a couple of ideas. I think these are mirroring many of yours as well. It's listening, maybe loving. The divine is present, patient, empathetic, maybe non-judgmental, and just being present with others. I mean, I think we're in the season of kind of gifts, and we hear the old expressions that the greatest present that you can give one is being present. So this presence. Brendan has an idea around this too. It says, what is presence? It is a grounding and harmony in this very moment. It is a physical alertness and an emotional acceptance, a spiritual awareness and a union with what is in front of us in the here and now. It is a vital consciousness to who we are and what we are sensing. It is a meaningfulness to what is meaningful. It is the way. I'm picking up that, a lot of what I'm hearing you guys talk about is also showing up in some of these definitions. Presence is a deep listening, an openness beyond one's perceptions. So this will be maybe in the short term our last kind of breakout, but just maybe can we go back into a conversation with your colleague and say, hey, how does presence support you individually and those that you support? So just see where that goes. We'll try about 4 minutes for this as well.
So again, maybe Scott, you'd repeat that prompt one more time, just as folks go in.
Sure. So as you go in, how does presence support you individually? So our conversation is going to be talking about presence. Certainly what's the definition, but how does it support us individually? How do we do that? What's it look like? How does it support us? And then how does that show up with others that you work with? All right, welcome back. Perhaps we can share a little bit of what showed up.
Troy and I had a beautiful conversation. Our work is really pretty similar in the way that we interact with our colleagues and then the kind of relationships that we have with our colleagues. And so we were talking, towards the end, basically about what a gift it is to be able to be present with other people and, to be present for them and to see them. And even though it's like you're being present to them, it's still so kind of rewarding, and that you get so much back by doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That's John also and I were talking a little bit. He shared, if I can, John, that sometimes we don't remember exactly what was said between each individual or individuals, but we do remember how we felt. And so I'm picking up that from what you guys, you and Troy were talking about, Katie. Thanks.
I'll just throw something out there because it was mentioned and alluded to, I think, by others. There's an authenticity that you bring, and the word I use sometimes is steadiness. And that's being present with whatever it is that you do. And if you're interacting with other people, if you're guiding, facilitating, or what have you, that authenticity, and I like what John mentioned as well, is how you feel. Well, that it's translated or it's telegraphed out by your presence. And I think that's a really important thing. So that authenticity piece, I like that was brought up.
Yeah, I think we kind of share a lot of different things, and we usually do that by words, right? But we're also, certainly the body language communicates a lot. So I think we kind of use the words, and we kind of I go into our headquarters and share thoughts, maybe ideas, maybe we want to help people, and yet certainly our body language communicates a lot as well, and there's probably being authentic or being present with them, and not maybe having a lot going on our head. At least this is my challenge sometimes, is like, hey, I'm not here to kind of fix, solve or control, something else, somebody else's suffering. Sometimes just being present with it is important. I guess I got the title of this through an article, in the trade magazines. There's a lot of ideas about, like, okay, what's the best kind of, is it CBT? Is it, DBT? What's the best kind of modality to help folks? And this person's suggestion was just, hey, how about just being present? And hit the play button around that. So, of course, many of these upcoming slides and stuff like that are not just my own ideas. They're a collection of a lot of other ideas, and I appreciate you guys sharing yours. Anybody else? Any more? All right, fair enough. Here we go. Let's try to share this again. So if I'm able to be more present, then that maybe allow a greater presence. So I guess teeing that up for just having our own practice. So we're just going to move into just a few minutes, and some of this will certainly be silent. I might guide a little bit, but we're just going to be practice being just present with ourselves. I think the context here a lot of times is how can I be present with others, but I also want to, with all the, what we're talking about, it's like, okay, well, how do I do this for myself? So when you're ready, let's practice this. And it may involve closing your eyes or kind of gazing to the floor. Yeah, just kind of noticing the mind might jump around. Perhaps we can just direct it to maybe just sensations of the body. What's present now in the body. Perhaps what's present in the heart. What are we feeling right now? Perhaps what have we been feeling? What's present? Perhaps just noticing, thoughts. There's a pause in the thoughts, just kind of listening, but just seeing what comes up next in terms of our thinking. Now let's return back to our body. I'm always amazed at how much the thoughts and feelings can bring some reactivity or activation of the body. So coming back to the body. Checking in on those areas that hold stress and activation, maybe in noticing these, we can provide a little softening. And maybe we'll just attend to our next 2 breath cycles, just watching, experiencing the breath coming in and out of the body, 2 breath cycles. Ready? Open your eyes. And I appreciate your practice. I think I'm speaking to the choir around this, that this practice can help us maybe be authentic and being present, allowing this sense of presence show up with one another. And I think this is a valuable resource that perhaps we don't give enough credence to. So spend a little time on that today. I think it's also pretty hard to do, not only for self, but for others, because things pop up, and you just kind of probably experience that on a minor stage. But at least my experience is that, especially with those people that I'm close to, my loved ones, I can get pretty activated. And so what that activation can be in a real simplistic form is maybe unprocessed grief. I think it's hard to kind of be present. It's hard to have at times. I spent, I think a better part of a decade resisting my practice. I was beating myself to practice because I knew it would be good for me, but at the same time, I didn't realize what was happening on the mat. that's a whole nother story, but it can be unpleasant. And I wasn't, able to observe and describe that. So that can be our individual experience, but when we're in front of somebody too, what might be hard for us to be present is just sorrow, suffering, a lot of things. Maybe it's long-term or just immediately happen. I've kind of just labeled this as unprocessed grief. And so if we're able to be present and allow that presence, I think that this process of grieving begins. Richard Rohr kind of talks about this, or this is the way I've interpreted kind of some of his.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you bet.
With unprocessed grief, would you kind of include unprocessed trauma in that?
Yes.
I mean, would you say they could go back and forth?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I think a lot of this could be interchanged. And again, I summarized it in maybe one word, which is unfair, but it's just unpleasant, right? There's unpleasantness that's in front of us. And certainly with my kids or others, I want to fix, manage, or control things. I want to help. I'll jump in. And I don't know if that's really what they might need. That might be a good, people sometimes do really need help. I guess this discussion is about pausing and bringing presence to maybe the super non-acute situations. And when I heard Richard Rohr talk about how transformation or change or grieving or integration or all this stuff happens, is that, somebody shares their suffering and then it's loved. Now, is that presence? I guess I'm going to interchange those two words. I find it interesting that people hire me to do this. So they spend a lot of time traveling here and being here. And I'm a professional listener. I try to offer presence. And so I hear the suffering and I do my best job to love it. And so I think love can transform, and it can transform us individually. If I'm just present with myself through meditation, mindfulness practices, because my suffering will show up, at least that's my experience. And it's my experience just being with others. Yeah, so transformation starts with stopping or suspending our habitual way of thinking or perceiving. Normally our thoughts have us rather than we have them. So again, my experience is that I'll be racing in thoughts on how to fix, manage, or control something. And if I can, my body is usually my first indication that that's happening. So I catch myself, I take maybe a breath, and I pause. And I think that can help me with just being presence for them. And perhaps that can allow for some of this exchange and transformation. I also find that typically there's a lot of judging going on, not only myself or maybe on people I'm with. And I find that judging does not allow grieving. I wonder if that makes sense. But I think that sometimes I'm so much in judgmental mind that I'm not really able to be with maybe the parts of me that will allow to grieve, or I'm with somebody and I'm judging that I need to do something, but there's some form of judgment or that comes up, and I don't know if that allows for grievings. But what maybe helps is just being present with my own feelings or body sensations. Certainly a lot of this is communicated through thoughts or words, but if we can kind of suspend to a degree and just allow access to the body, to the heart, and certainly, to the mind, this can allow for the transformation. I think, the story in my head around the industry is that, it's a lot of headquarters, and we're kind of thinking around through twos, and certainly cognitive therapy can be supportive. I'm finding through my own experience and just working with others through brain spotting and other modalities that we really need to get the body and the heart involved in this process. And I think that can happen if I'm paying attention to it and or even ask for it in some ways. So bringing some curiosity to all that. Certainly somebody I've done some training with, says that we're all invited to move towards paying attention and listening without judging. By doing so, we notice our thinking, feelings, body sensations that normally surface with others. With this awareness, we can return to being present. Yeah. So, mindfulness, knowing what's happening while it's happening without preference. So we kind of hear a lot of this. I mean, I think we have a lot of working definitions of mindfulness or meditations or being present or presence. And we're kind of interchanging a lot of these. Certainly there's a lot of overlap. I think the invitation here is just grab one word or one sentence or one feeling from this conversation and hopefully practice for yourself or others. As we're practicing the mindfulness thing, I think, as we did a little bit earlier, there can be, maybe many objects that we can place our awareness in, and body sensations, the feelings, the thoughts, our thinking, or it can be a part of, some patterns. And so kind of maybe observing and describing those can be supportive of being present with ourselves and with others. Sometimes just noticing and just saying, my experience is like, there can be, people will grab their neck, or maybe they're not identifying a feeling. They're all just, stuck in story. The invitation is, I'm wondering how you're feeling. Sometimes that doesn't bring people to feelings. It brings it to more of the story. But sometimes, how do we get access beyond our stories to the feelings and body sensations? I noticed you're kind of rubbing your neck as you're talking. It's interesting how that prompts maybe some different type of awareness for them as well. Let's practice again. I'll say this, I'll tee this up a little bit. Looks like, steps for deep listening. We're going to get into this, and this will kind of wrap things up here a little bit. But let's, one part for, maybe deep listening to ourselves or others, another kind of idea of what presence is. Deep listening is to quiet your mind. So let's practice that. So let's just take a minute or two. I probably am not going to talk much. It's just going to be a minute or two of just being present with it all, allowing it all, and in some ways we're working on just quieting this maybe river of thought or this stream. So. All right. Yeah, that's just short pause. I'm always amazed that I can check in the two areas that hold stress for me, muscles in my face and my buttocks area. Every time I check in with those areas, I can always soften them. These thoughts, these feelings, slowly just tighten me up. And then when I take a pause, it can soften things and allow me just to maybe, be present, more present. Okay, let's talk about these maybe ideas around deep listening. So quiet your mind. This idea of talk less, feel more, allowing space. Maybe avoiding advice. Maybe just let one person tell their story, and then maybe reflect, affirm, and this empathy. We just kind of practice quieting our mind, and certainly that can be done with our individual self and with others. Sometimes I'll notice that I'm not with that person. I've time traveled somewhere else. I'm not even in the room. So it's mindfulness. Where am I? Where is my mind? And to kind of bring it back. I guess the second thing is, talk less, feel more. Saw this once, kind of thought it was interesting. It hardly seems like a coincidence that silent is an anagram for listen. In brain spotting, kind of the acronym that we're encouraged to kind of think about is WAIT. So as people are processing things, and they're incorporating their heart and their body, particularly during brain spotting, but it can be during any normal conversation. As a facilitator, we're encouraged to wait And it's certainly, why am I talking? I'm filling up space. And I think space allows a lot of integration and processing. So a lot of gaze spotting. Some people will talk and they'll gaze. I sit next to a window, so I'm always amazed. After the pandemic, I went outside with clients and people process different outside. So from that point on, I went inside, but I always sat next to a window that looked outside. People don't look at me, they look outside. So they're gaze spotting. And as they're processing, hopefully checking in, inviting them to check in their body and their feelings. And that helps, I suppose, the grieving process, in a quick summary, which might be transformation. So I just try to wait. And certainly try not to interrupt. Sometimes I love to help folks. I want to hear myself. If I'm a professional listener, that can be hard some too. Why are they paying me? All sorts of stories can hit up in my head. But I don't try not to interrupt or allow space and pause. So that's with other people. I saw this once. I'll never be free until I can be still with my own pain. So it's just from a personal practice, when I feel the unpleasant, I'm trying to frame this, and it's like, this is an opportunity for me to learn and grow. I certainly see that in my relationships too. If there's some conflict or something's unpleasant, or it feels painful, it's really an opportunity for me to allow some space, to pause, not interrupt this to a degree, to try to fix, manage, or control it, as I think that can allow for transformation. Yeah, the advice thing, sure. It's just trying to be curious. I try to use, I'm noticing or I'm wondering type language. I find that I do want to help, and I've said that before, and that I find that that's when when my ego wants to show up to fix, manage, or control. I want something out of this. I try to really be supportive, and part of it's just to have faith that the process is going to go the way it needs to, and I don't know how much help they need. On a personal practice, sometimes, the voice inside of my head is an asshole. That's what Dan Harris says. And I got a kick out of that, because I guess sometimes that's me. So who is this voice? And sometimes I'm curious, like sometimes there's a lot of advice I'm giving myself, which might sound like, planning mind. I'm a big planning mind. And sometimes I'm like, well, whose voice is this? Where's this come from? If, so just for a personal practice. Don't let your story take over. Yeah, certainly we're story making machines. And so the stories were going to happen. So, hey, how can we let the story be present with others? And then, just for ourselves, we're certainly going to notice our stories, and maybe we can kind of classify them or organize them or see the pattern. But when I'm listening to some people, sometimes I really want to tell my story, because I think that's a part that feels like empathy. I think empathy really involves just, being with somebody and their feelings. I think sympathy involves understanding somebody else's emotions, but from our own perspective. So when I'm sympathetic, I'm hearing it from my own perspective, and that's when I want to get into my own stories and kind of share them. So I'm trying to be mindful of that. Again, we are the story-making machines. This last idea here is just kind of this, pure kind of imago kind of therapy stuff, is that sometimes it's just, people just will, to experience presence, sometimes we just kind of maybe summarize what we're hearing or reflect back a little bit what we say, or from even an empathetic point, which would be the feelings, or maybe validate or affirm them. That's the tangible kind of steps around receivership of their stories, and how to actually provide some love around that. In the interest of time, let's just take a quick pause. I don't think this to be long. Let's practice presence again. I once heard that a single breath can be a great act of self-care. So let's just notice a single breath. Okay. Some other ideas. I find that if I'm not sleeping, or I'm not drinking water or whole foods, here's the list for me. This is my list. So these are some things that help me stay present to myself and others. But if I'm struggling on any of these areas, or I don't get my nature fix, or I have some silence or movement, Troy helps me with that. then I get a little twitchy. I get a little bit more reactive. And so I kind of say, hey, this seems simple, but it isn't simple. All right. Enough from me. I might just stop so I can see you all. Yeah, just, throwing it open. Any thoughts, noticings, wonderings?
So it was a very powerful presentation tonight. I think hit me right at the right time. Could you share that Richard Rohr quote one more time, just at some point in time, maybe towards the end of the conversation?
2 ingredients for transformation: suffering and love.
Ingredients. Okay, I was looking for it. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Eckhart Tolle talks about guardian angels. I think he wrote a book and talks about animals and their ability to be present. A lot of people have animals, and certainly cats and dogs is who he specifically talks about. And in reading that, I'm like, oh yeah, this species gets it.
It's a great job, Scott. It was definitely, like Katie said, perfect timing for the knowledge on presence. And the big one I know I have is, like you said, the ego or the story of just wanting to interject and tell my story when that's not truly what most people are wanting at that point. I think that's just our human nature to want to, it's not a one-up. It's just like, again, as you said, to empathize with them, but some people may take that the wrong way. And I liked your point of silence, of just silence can be just the best part. They're processing at that time. If you keep interjecting, you don't give them that time to process or to think, or they're starting to, and then you break that feedback loop. And now they're outside of that, now they're listening to you, and it's just having some dead space, which I know we should not do when we communicate, in a speech, if I'm just talking. But if we're present with one another, that pause can go a long way. Or tell me more, or the different words that you use to get them to maybe dig a little deeper, or tell me how that feels, or how your body, or, what are you feeling? Like you said, when you grab your neck, it's those things get them to, oh, I didn't know I do that. So it's that mannerism of something is coming up. So what is that? And tell me more, or share a little bit more, if you don't mind, can help a ton, rather than, well, I did this. And I'm like, oh, stop. It's very hard to just tell myself to stop. And I do. It's taken a while, but it's helped a ton from what John and Robert have taught and everybody else on this, and sitting down with Katie, and definitely with you, Scott, in the mornings that we're at the gym, is understanding that presence. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's interesting. I have to remind myself often just to wait. And in my work, I have to even say, hey, this is what we're going to do sometimes, because the normal banter back and forth with people has a certain pace. And so if we're not to say anything, then that can get weird for folks, creates a lot of activation. And then, they're interrupted from where they were maybe thinking or integrating. And so, I say, hey, listen, a heads up is that sometimes we're just going to have some silence here, and we're going to pause. It's kind of honoring what you're saying, and then you process. And at some point when you look at me, then we'll go from there. But a lot of times we're just processing. So, yeah. And I guess, maybe it's the season, here's the season, it's like, I'll get together, my daughters come home, and I'll be excited, and we all want to swap stories. And at least with my family, I'm the introvert, and it's hard for me even to grab the microphone to talk. I need the talking stick. So there's a lot that's going on. And a lot of times I want to ask them dozens of questions, like, hey, how was that? Blah, 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 blah. That's all about me. It's my curiosity. And I was like, hey, just let's see where they want to take this conversation. What do they want to say about their travels or what's happened in their lives? So yeah, that's the present for the holidays, right? Presents.
Scott, I really appreciate the way you are bringing forward all this different roles that we have, right? We all have so many roles that we live throughout our lives, whether it's the professional role, the family, within the community, with friends, with acquaintances. Those, we're different with people. We have our conversations in particular ways. And I love that you're bringing this kind of as a guiding, right? It can be like a North Star, this idea. And Troy, when you're saying, it's a learn. I mean, for me, it can be learned with a lot of training, just to not, become self-referential, right? Because, we all have stories, we all have massive histories, and something sparks a little something in my mind about what happened to me. But, am I listening to that? Am I listening to you and your story? And I think that the process of internal inquiry, trying to hear more than the words, I think that's part of presence. And for me, that's a lot of my work, is to see how can I don't think it's easy. How can I find that question, Troy, like you're saying, and some of those, some people call them, I can't remember what they call them, but it's like a little phrase that you can use, like, tell me more. Can you tell me more about that?
One of the things that strikes me, Scott, is and of course, Brene Brown's made it popular, but you really kind of present yourself in a vulnerable way, kind of poke a little fun at yourself, bring a little personal stories into it, and I think that's a nice touch and a nice way to really make connection with people and demonstrate the presence that you're talking about.
Yeah, thanks you all. I guess as much as I really focus on how am I doing that with others, I have to really notice myself. I find myself still not listening to me, and so whatever practice allows that, the journaling or maybe my own therapy, practicing mindfulness. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I'm good, and I gotta get stuff done, or mow through the to-do list. But it's really I gotta work on my own presence. Thank you all.
So you had mindful based stress reduction course coming up 2024, right? What's that entailing coming up? Your co-doing.
Yep. The MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, usually teach it 2 cycles. There's kind of a winter, so it would be a February, March. It's 8 classes, all-day retreat after weeks 6, and it's mindfulness. It's the practice of meditation to develop mindfulness. Insight Counseling Center is probably where you get some more information around that. Insight-counseling-center. So it's a center of one. It's just me, but there's some information there that's of interest. So thanks. Thank you all. It's good to be with you. And I'm trying to practice what I preach here, right? So this is self-serving in many ways too. So thank you.
Well, we really appreciate your time, Scott, and being here. Now, the MBSR, this is in-person training that you're doing in the Indianapolis area.
Yeah, it's at St. Luke's Methodist Church, about 86 in Meridian. There's a couple of orientations in January. It's just kind of like people come, there's no charge, just to see if this is a good fit. I co-facilitated with Leslie Flowers, so the 2 of us sit with whoever shows up and practice mindfulness.
Are there any type of CEUs or certificates or anything with this kind of a class?
I haven't explored that, so at this time,
okay.
no, but maybe that could be solved. There's a fee. It's $450. It runs for 2.5 hours each class, and it'll be a Thursday night and a Friday morning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really a very highly regarded, renowned curriculum. The mindfulness-based stress reduction has been offered for how many decades? 40 years?
Yeah, I think it was in the 70s that John Kabat-Zinn started.
Yeah. So it's tried and true. There's incredible research and documentation around it. And if you get the chance, I would highly recommend it. Well, thank you, everybody. We're here at our time. It's been great to see you all. It's always good to see all these faces here. And wishing you all the best. Looking forward to next Wednesday, Katie Carlson coming back again. Scott, thank you. You know you're always welcome here. Please join us whenever you can Wednesday evenings.
Thank you all. Peace to you.
Thank you, Scott. Be well.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, everybody.
Bye.
Good to see you all.
Be well.